Yes, so this is the second part of the lecture. I am recording short clips so that you can download and watch these and hopefully make your own notes. So as I was saying, The Empire Writes Back it's also a book. It's an edited book by Bill Ashcroft, Gareth Griffiths, and Helen Tiffany. You can Google the book. It's called The Empire Writes Back, and you will get the editors. It contains a series of essays about how the ex-colonies of European countries, they're using the language, the tongue of the colonizer to talk back to the colonial power. And the author, Salman Rushdie, you can Google him, Salman Rushdie, Salman Rushdie, he comes up with the phrase Englishes and not English, because what Rushdie is saying is that there is no one English anymore. There is something called Englishes now. Why? Because, for example, English is the native language of course, of England. And English, or the Britishers, will have a certain way of speaking and writing English. For example, they will be saying table, and they will be saying, they'll be pronouncing words in a certain way, and an Indian will not be using the same pronunciation. So Rushdie comes up with this whole idea called Englishes. Now there is no one standardized English, but there is a set of ways of speaking and writing English, which Rushdie calls as Englishes. For instance, a lot of native words, Indian words like roti, chapati, etc., they become part of the post-colonial vocabulary. What do I mean by this? When Indian writers are writing in English, they will use words like roti, they would use words like chapati, they would use words like lathi charge, etc., which are not traditionally part of the English vocabulary, but now they're included in the Oxford English Dictionary because these are part of the post-colonial vocabulary and what Salman Rushdie refers to as Englishes. Okay. Now, I spoke about how the first part, the earlier part of post-colonial English, it originates with nationalistic sentiment and patriotic feelings. I've talked about how novelists like Mulk Raj Anand and R.K. Narayan are trying to represent a certain vision of Indian society riddled with caste and class issues, riddled with religious disparities. They're trying to project this to the colonizing country, that is to England. And of course, post-colonial writing has moved much ahead since then. And now, present writers who write in English, for example, writers like Amitav Ghosh, writers like Arundhati Roy, writers like Kiran Desai, etc., they're focusing much more on localized issues. For example, Kiran Desai's novel, The Inheritance of Loss, it focuses on the 1986 Gorkhaland agitation, and it is the first novel written in the English language which talks about this. It is one of the backgrounds of the novel. So you have localized issues, you have far more globalized issues and localized issues which are now sort of finding focus in the writings by post-colonial writers. Okay. Now, I'll have to also explain to you two concepts. Okay, both these concepts originate, they are there by African writers. As I've already told you, Africa was also colonized by England. Parts of Africa, most parts of Africa were colonized by England. And in his 1986 book, this famous African writer called Ngugi wa Thiong'o, you can Google him. It's spelled as N'(Gugi) small W-O, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, capital Thing apostrophe O. Wa Thiong'o comes up with this concept called, the concept is very important, you must keep this in mind, called decolonizing the mind. That is, what he's talking about is a language is not just a language, but it is a bearer of culture. Euta language matrai haina, euta cultural ko carrier pani ho. So the British by attempting to teach English were also attempting to impose their culture upon the colonized countries. So in this case, English becomes a bearer or a signifier. Signifier is a good word if you want to use it, of a certain culture, that is of an English culture, of an European culture. And Wa Thiong'o in his 1986 book, the book is itself called Decolonizing the Mind. Wa Thiong'o is saying that we have to unlearn all that we have learned. So we have to not just unlearn English, we have to unlearn an entire civilization. And Wa Thiong'o is also very critical of the activities of the missionaries, the Christian missionaries missionaries, for instance, who were proselytizing or converting Africans into Christianity. Now, this is something that was not done in India, for instance. India outlawed, the British East India Company outlawed missionary activity here, which is the reason why the priests could not, the evangelists could not convert too many people, but in Africa they were also converting people. And Wathiongo is deeply critical of this sort of exercise as well, that you are imposing a certain culture. By imposing a certain language, you're also imposing a certain culture. And Wathiongo comes up with this concept called decolonizing the mind, where he's saying it is not enough to unlearn English. We have to go back to our own native customs, to our own native languages, to our own vernacular tongues, to our own native religions as well. And in his writings, Wathiongo is highlighting the need to bring up, the need to, talk about the need to foreground or the need to bring up the indigenous languages, the indigenous cultures, and to project these before a Western world. Now, as opposed to this, another African writer called Wole Soyinka, you can Google him, Soyinka or Soyinka, it's pronounced in both ways, Wole, capital W, surname is capital Soyinka. Wole Soyinka is saying that decolonizing is not possible. You cannot undo what you have done for 200 years. So Soyinka, he was himself educated in England, and he chooses the medium of English to express himself. So he's writing in English, and Wathiongo and Soyinka, both of them are African writers. They are polar opposites of each other. Wathiongo le ke bhandaisa ki English lai unlearn garnu parcha. We have to unlearn English, and we have to unlearn all the customs and the norms that have been imposed upon us by the imposition of English by the Britisher. And Soyinka is saying it is not possible to outdo 200 years of learning, to completely undo 200 years of learning. So we have to use the medium of English itself, and through this medium we have to express our indigenous languages, our indigenous customs, our indigenous religions, and our indigenous cultures. Okay, so these two concepts are very important. When I'll be giving you the written material, I'll be talking about these two concepts in some detail, and I'll also be talking about the various phases of post-colonial literature in India. Now, as I was saying, to go back to the last point of this lecture, you also need to understand that language plays a big factor in post-colonial writing, because as I've already mentioned, Salman Rushdie speaks of Englishes. That is, there is no one English anymore. There is no one standardized English anymore. English is as much, say, my language as it is, say, Nipen's language, as it is, say, the language of a Britisher. Okay, so, but we will have different ways of speaking English. An American will have a certain way of speaking English. A South Indian will have a certain way of speaking English. A Nepali will have a certain way of speaking English. And of course, a Britisher will have a certain way of speaking English. Now, it does not mean that the Britisher's way is the only correct way of speaking English or writing English. Ours is as much correct and legitimate, and Kamla Das, the poet, talks about this. Ours is as much legitimate legitimate a form of expression as, say, that of the Britisher. And Salman Rushdie calls this Englishes. So language becomes a very important aspect of post-colonial writing. And as I've already said, that you will find a lot of use of native words. For example, roti, chapati, you'll find all these words being used in the novels which are written by Indian writers. And now these words have also been included in the Oxford English Dictionary. So language then becomes a powerful medium of expression. A language that does not necessarily mimic the idea of mimic the British way of speaking, but it foregrounds the indigenous way of speaking English. So English has now been appropriated and it has been made into our language as well. Okay, so that is the basics of post-colonialism for you. So what I will try to do is tomorrow I'll try to give you some written material on post-colonialism. I'll be forwarding them in the group, and hopefully all of you will be able to download them. And all of you, please also listen to these two short lectures. I have tried to sum up the main points of post-colonial writing, and this is for your benefit. So just try and listen to them, and in case you have any queries, you can get back to me on the WhatsApp group. Okay, thank you, and good night to all of you.